Well, welcome everybody. You're at Visionality's Building Forward. My name is Emily Barony and I'm the CEO of Visionality. And I'm really excited to talk with our two guest stars today, Dani Lynch and Nancy Weiss. And they are here to talk about the incredible success that was the Foothills Forever campaign. And so I just want to open it up to you guys. Oh, whoops. Start your timers for 25 minutes. And tell me about the campaign. Tell me about how it started, why it started, what's at sort of the root of the Foothills Forever campaign.
Dan, you want to go first?
I'll go first. Yeah. I mean, I've thought a lot about this because you asked this question yesterday, and I want to say thanks to everyone for being here and give a big thank you to Visionality for having us. Yeah, and that's always everyone's first question. It's like, how did this all start? How the heck did you raise 20 million in 90 days? And sitting with this, the short answer is passion. So finding your own personal passion for what you do, I believe, is the key to success with anything that you put energy into. So if you aren't leading from a place of love and passion, it's really hard for anyone to get behind you, including yourself. So it really is your compass moving into anything, and it gives you a reason and a purpose, and it really forces you to make choices from your intrinsic motivations. And people really feel that. I feel like that's a big reason why our community stepped up so quickly. They got involved, and it was, yeah, they helped lead the charge because of that passion piece. So yeah, and I think the other part is understanding where your passion is coming from. So really knowing your why and getting really clear about it. Like, this was really important for me in the beginning of the Foothills campaign to understand and to be able to clearly articulate why, why am I doing this? So without passion for your why you do what you do, it's so easy to give up when times get difficult, which is, that will happen. We've all been there. So I really do believe like being clear on your passion and your why, as well as sharing it with your community. Well, I don't know if Nancy, you agree with this, but it not only attracted the people that believed in what we believed in, but it also allowed for those who aren't necessarily sure what they believe in to pause, take a moment, really feel your authentic passion and drive, and then possibly get behind it simply because it moved them. So I feel like I saw that a lot in this campaign. It was the fire that continually fueled our campaign team, for lack of a better word. We don't want fires there. But yeah, it's just one of the most important pieces, if not the most important piece, I think, with any project or endeavor. And I know without having that passion, we would not have been successful in saving the land or raising 20 million in 90 days. So I think that's just always a good place to start. It sounds really simple, but that's really, I think, the key piece there.
I love it. Nancy, why don't you just give me like a high level snapshot of what was the campaign, what was the outcome, what was the goal, all just like give me the high level stuff.
Yeah, so this was a campaign that was, in 90 days, right, to secure the land, but really 20 years in the making. The land had been, originally, of course, Shumash land, so super important to acknowledge that first. But there'd been development ideas for the entire San Marcos, what we now think of as the San Marcos Foothills Preserve, for really generations. And the San Marcos Foothills Coalition was able to secure the 200 of the approximately 350 acres 15 years ago. But the kind of the jewel of the property, so-called, was the West Mesa, and they had to kind of let that go. They were able to get kind of it as far as they could. And it was folks like Dani and her compatriots with Save San Marcos Foothills, Channel Islands Restoration, folks like Ken Owen and others who really, kind of rang the bell again and said, is this possible to give this this a go. And then folks will probably remember that, of course, there were folks who were defending the land, physically on the land, when a bulldozer was starting to roll. So there was kind of that very intense and probably to the public's view, dramatic moment, some arrests and all of that. And behind the scenes, there was a lot of negotiation going on with with the developer and kind of the landowner by extension. And so it was kind of a bunch of factors coming together, converging all at once that kind of created a bit of an apex moment. And transactionally, we were able to get the attorney, Mark Stillo, was able to negotiate for a purchase, an option to purchase if we could raise, it's actually 18 million is what the request was, or the agreement was. And of course there's costs, and we want an endowment to run with the land and all of that, and that equals the 20 million. And so that was the charge, right? Was, and then we had these different tranches, people remember, where we had to actually put into escrow initial million, and then another 4 million, another 5 million 3 weeks after that. That's just like breakneck pace. But without those, frankly, we probably really wouldn't have done it. We all know that one of the beauties and the challenges of capital campaigns is the deadline driven orientation to it. And of course, the other thing that makes it different from like endowment or annual fundraising is you actually are getting something tangible, through the campaign. So in this case, land. So all those things really kind of, helped, both jumpstart it, and then of course kind of see it through overview wise.
So I just love it. The sort of clickbait headline of this campaign is 20 million in 90 days, right? Crowdfunding. This was not crowdfunding. Tell me, that was a component of it. You guys had thousands of donations. It's incredible, but there was so much more that went into this. And I love what you said, that it was a 90-day campaign, 20 years in the making. So talk me through how it is both crowdfunding in 90 days, but also like so fundamentally not crowdfunding in 90 days.
Yeah, so it's a campaign where we needed to do everything, right, and all at once. So some of us have likened it more to a political campaign, like trying to get an initiative, passed, or a candidate in office. And one of the reasons I was really super happy that Dani could be here was one of the big things you have to do in a political campaign is you need name recognition, right? You need folks to just think of the name and understand what you're talking about. And Save San Marcos Foothills with Dani and Sam, they had this incredible social media campaign already going before we had that purchase option that went into place, and that was gigantic. So there's that. And then, viability was the big question, right? And all the way to the very end, like, is this possible? And we had lots and lots of people just say, no way, like this isn't going to happen. And there are certainly people in our campaign too that were like, yeah, we're not gonna be able to do it, but we're going to give it a go because we need to, because of the passion and the love for the land and the importance and really, the sacredness to, Chumash folks, etc. So we had to give it a go. But the other component, and this was part of the reason I jumped in, was just applying what I call the science of fundraising, which is those tried and true methods, and particularly, we had to have, really gigantic contributions. Like the community stepped up on a grassroots level and proved ourselves right away. And without that, just so much gratitude for the folks who gave multiple gifts, the kids who sold, eggs in Montecito, to the Makers Mart in Isla Vista, all of that grassroots effort proved up, I think, to people who have more resources, who have greater resources, could make the gifts that were $1,000, $5,000, all the way up to the $5 million contributor we had in kind of the final hours. all of that. So that's the part, Dani and Sam and others really led that kind of grassroots, I don't know if crowdfunding is the right term, but more like just come one, come all, and welcoming in. And then there were a bunch of us behind the scenes just contacting everybody we knew who could make more sizable contributions and invite them also to the table. Dani, I don't know if you want to say anything about the social media, because that's part that crowdfunding feeling maybe that Emily, you were speaking to.
Yeah, I think that, like I was saying, it started with passion and knowing your why. And then from there, we were able to really educate folks on why the land was so important, right? I mean, why this wasn't appropriate to build houses on this land, and really go into the ecology and all of that. And so that's kind of the piece where we started. And then people really started to understand that this wasn't appropriate for the land and why, and got behind us. So, I mean, we started with volunteers. You have to have your boots on the ground. We were there almost every day in the beginning, and we were canvassing. We made shirts. So branding became really important early on, because to me, I know, yes, political campaign, it also felt like a movement. It was like showing our young community that this is the time to step up and you can actually create change. And this is what it looks like. So it was very hands-on. There was just a lot of involvement in the beginning. And yes, Instagram blew up, but it was that passion piece. I mean, we were putting reels together that were really moving, that really helped. We were doing really fun, creative mini campaigns where it's like, tell 10 friends or share this post with 10 people and donate $10, and showed them in a graph how much that could make in a week to 2 weeks. So it was like, we just knew our audience. We knew that we were not going to maybe get 5 million from the Instagram, but that it's almost like that base, that foundation piece of like, okay, this is where you start. And then you can really, like Nancy was saying, really show that this is what the community wants and needs. And so anyone will get behind it at that point, even if they're like, I've never been to the land, which a lot of people had not been to the land, who donated, pretty large gifts. I mean, it was incredible. And I mean, we could go on for days about like how creative it got. And there's a lot to unpack there.
Well, and at the heart of this, you guys empowered the community to own this movement. And I love that word. It was a movement. It was the community coming together saying, we as a community believe that this is important. And then you made I'm getting goosebumps. And then you made space available for every person to show up in a way that they were able to show up. And maybe that was volunteering. Maybe that was a $1 gift. Maybe that was a $5 million gift. Maybe that was organizing the maker market. And I just love that you guys guided. Yes, there was a huge guidance process, right? But you really allowed the community to show up in the ways that they wanted to show up. Talk to me, like, was there something that was really surprising in the way that the community showed up, or something maybe that you hadn't seen before?
Gosh, lots of them. The one thing I wanted to just say, I said yesterday, shout out, of course, to Santa Barbara Foundation, who pivoted within hours, when I made the call and talked to Jackie Carrera and said, would you consider being our fiscal sponsor? And she just said yes. I mean, it was really no hesitation there. And of course, part of it was the base, right? And the knowledge already that Dani and others had built for the land. But shortly after that, one of the staff members reached out and asked, could you let us know the different events that are happening, the little fundraisers that were popping up, the fish market raffle, and gosh, so many things in the early days of the campaign, early hours, I should call it, right? It wasn't very long. And we just said, we'd love to, but we don't know what those are. Like, the community just took it because I think you're right. It was a movement. And that was for me a really fun moment, was basically not only not knowing and just appreciating so much effort was just percolating up, right? So much organizing really was happening. That it was so exciting to see it, and also the really just trusting, right? And just being able to say, gosh, we'd love to, and we don't know, and just like putting it in the hands of the community alongside our own. And that's really the reality, is that none of us really own this land, right? And so there was something for me that made me feel even more deeply connected to the land and the community, and very grateful.
Yeah.
Dani, you had something.
Oh, I mean, it was the same. It was really the same. It was honestly, for me, it was how many amazing experts like Nancy coming together and forming this like rock star campaign team that, I mean, it was just amazing. And I feel like the land really brought all of us together. And the one thing that I will say about the businesses is we kind of shifted our perspectives a little bit. We reached out to all businesses and we were like, this is an incredible opportunity that I want you to be a part of. And not only because it was COVID times, it was like, we want to support you and bringing in more people while supporting a good cause. And that was really cool to be able to not only like be in this activism moment of working on saving the land, but supporting the community. I mean, it was really helping businesses bring in more people, because they weren't really, they barely had anyone there. So I don't know, there were so many incredible moments.
Well, and I want to expand on the professional side of this movement, right? So we've covered like how deeply this movement was embraced by the community, but it was, the foundation of it was deeply professional, deeply like intricate. So Nancy, you mentioned the Santa Barbara Foundation, so they were the fiscal sponsor. This is it makes my heart very sad when I see these GoFundMe campaigns or whatever crowdfunding campaigns. It's not tied to a C3, and then there are tax implications that people, really well-meaning people, and they just don't know what they don't know, and their heart's in the right place, but just like sort of the nuts and bolts of like fundraising. So you landed the fiscal sponsor, which is huge. Like, that's very important so that you can legally receive tax deductible donations and manage that money professionally and appropriately. You had a team of attorneys, right? Because there was negotiations, there were option agreements, right? So talk to me about like the real professional piece. What was the backbone of the campaign?
Yes, well, I think in terms of the campaign and the structure, you're right. There's a bunch of people who fed into it, and I should say Channel Islands Restoration was the original fiscal and actually continued, and to some degree still continues alongside Santa Barbara Foundation. So shout out to them and their leadership. I think you're right. It was first Mark Chatillo, who was kind of the architect of the deal, and all of us, as we began to convene, recognizing that we had to surround ourselves with folks who had a ton of skills in lots of different areas, and really just like any project, building your team. Who do you need? And I don't know about all of you that are here, but I don't know how to do a lot of things. But I think I've learned over my decades of being on this planet that I do know how to surround myself with people who are highly skilled and lovely to work with. And that's the beauty of it. And even though it was super intense and we were scared a lot, I think, worried we wouldn't be able to do it, or that we'd have a misstep or something like that. It was also very exciting and super fun because of the people involved. So I like to have fun along the path because, gosh, there's enough hardship and difficult things. And if we can, live in community, we can support each other and of course have some fun, that'd be great. So, that part looks like in some ways, almost any other capital campaign. And that was the piece, that myself and a couple other people, including Peter Schuyler, jumped in to try to put the structure together and support Mark and folks like Dani and Ken Owen at CIR, who were busy doing other pieces. So I think all told, we created a, classic honorary, co-chairs. I think there's 5 or 6 of those, advisory committee members. Our leadership council still exists. There was an executive committee within that. And then some folks that were populating different committees. And then behind each of us who were fundraising was a whole team of kind of just friends or colleagues that we would call upon. I think of our former mayor, Helene Schneider, right? She was kind of part of my team behind the scenes. I don't think she even shows up on the roster, right? But Helene and I would talk regularly, like, who do you know? And can you get these materials to folks you think might be able to make a gift? And she'd say, sure. And then, I'd circle back with her and all of that. So just building that out. So probably all told, that the team was, if I had to guess, about 120 people. We met every morning during the work week at 8 a.m. I think that was my idea, because the thing that sometimes folks forget in these campaigns is you've got to have excellent internal communication. You need your external, like the stuff Dani, and others put together for sure. But if you're not communicating amongst yourselves, then you don't have kind of a disciplined team, and you need to be able to share what's going on. Like, did you talk to so-and-so and what's going on with that business? And did you circle back with Santa Barbara Foundation about, that wonderful, stock gift that's coming through, all of that. And the only way I could think to do with that was to call a daily meeting, because there wasn't time. There just literally was not. Normally you'd have monthly meetings or even weekly meetings, or your core team would meet weekly and everybody else would meet monthly, classic structures for humans to communicate. We didn't have time. So I know people probably are still mad at me about that at some level, but that's where Zoom, right, really showed up. And that in the pandemic, I just have to say, I don't know if we could have done this without the pandemic moment, in a way, because technology that we'd already all been kind of trained up in to some degree helped. And folks were accustomed to communicating over text, phone, Zoom. And I don't think I've ever received texts, saying I'm in for 100, meaning $100,000. I mean, when have any of us secured gifts over text? I've never done that. It was amazing. Yeah. And I'd just be like, great, thank you. Perfecting my thank you with my thumbs. I was just, but folks were accustomed to that, right? Like it's kind of a new normal. And I think the other reason lots of people hopped in was that it felt good to be part of something positive, and like that, even if it was a crazy idea, and we had a number of folks that literally in the professional world just said, no effing way, like, you're just not going to do this. But it's like, well, let's give it a go, right? And it was this kind of positive, infectious, feeling, as opposed to, COVID, which was truly infectious and killing people, right? So I think that really added something, right? Like the unique ingredient, that you toss on top of your soup, and everybody goes, wow, and that kind of makes part of it possible.
Yeah. We have 2 minutes left in our formal presentation. So I want everyone to put their questions, comments, feedback, kudos in the chat, or come on screen if you want to have a conversation, share your success stories, ask questions. We've got 2 truly gifted professionals here with you. So come on board. I want to ask you one more follow-up question about, you mentioned needing to be disciplined in your communications, and there was such an interesting duality between like the community owning this, but also the professional team needing to be deeply disciplined in the process and the language and the communications and the structure. So can you guys talk to me sort of about how it was navigating that like tightrope?
Challenging, right, Dani?
Yeah.
So let me give a little backdrop, which is that part of the purchase agreement mandated that any of our materials would be approved by Chuck Landy and his attorney. And there were really, and the reason for that, shout out to Chuck here for going along on this ride with us, was because, if we weren't successful, then he was still going to carry forward with his plans, and he needed to be able to sell those lots and those homes. And he didn't want anything that would jeopardize that. So that's his perspective. And I think that's a reminder that even though people might vehemently disagree with that, right? And that shouldn't have been developed, that's not appropriate for the land, et cetera. It's just the counter view to that, right? That's his business. That's what he does. And so how do you then bring sides that were kind of diametrically kind of seeming on the opposite, right? How do you get at the interests, right? Mediation parlance, we would say, instead of positions, interests. And so the language, therefore, became kind of that meeting place of still helping us pursue what we thought was right, but also preserving his ability to move forward if we weren't successful. And while that was super challenging, I think particularly Dani felt it more than I would. It did, on the kind of the fundraising side, it created a highly disciplined message and materials and limited materials. And in a way that's easier than having too much and you're trying to manage all of that, right? And we also couldn't guarantee that the community, who was involved, who wasn't part of our campaign, would follow messaging. We couldn't control that. So there was an understanding of that. So we got to let that go, right? We just had to adhere to the agreement, those of us who were formally part of the campaign. But Dani, do you want to say anything about how that was on the ground?
Well, luckily we already had a really strong foundation by the time we got the purchase agreement, and then that became a thing. But I think, again, it's the boots on the ground. I mean, yes, we had to be careful with our languaging, anything that would be in print or on Instagram, anything like that. But if you had one-on-one time with somebody, you could really connect with them in the way that you wanted to and use the language that you wanted to. So for us, we just had to kind of move things at that point, not focusing so much on social media because there were so many things that we couldn't say. And a lot of the things were very triggering for some communities of what we can't say. So it was important that our presence was still there. And it goes back to what Nancy was saying about having I almost felt like it was like perfect organization. It was so important that we had that clear communication every single day because everyone had to know what their role was and stay with it. I couldn't have been like focusing on other things while doing what I was doing and making sure that our volunteers were there every single day, really connecting in a way that we wanted to, that we couldn't do anymore. So I think that was the important element, is still having a presence in the community and whatever endeavor you're in, you have to have that piece. It's really important. And if you can't do it, you have to have volunteers that can. So, yeah.
Love it. Love it. I see Taryn put in the chat, she was a multiple time donor and she really appreciated the tone and frequency of the communications. It was urgent in tone, but not over the top. And I wasn't bombarded every day. Great balance. That is such a tough balance.
Thank you, Dani.
Well, my friends, what other questions do you have for our amazing guest stars, or pop on and share maybe your lived experience doing a big campaign or a little campaign or a grassroots campaign, or perhaps we've done it. We've answered all the questions about fundraising.
Ever.
I'm curious, put in the chat if those of you who were donors, and I see Llewellyn raising her hand, so I'm going to bring her on.
Hi, thank you so much for the awesome presentation. So I have a question about how you were able to find a balance in fundraising. There's so much pressure by certain like belief systems to just chase the really big donors. And I can imagine that the pressure for that was really real for you since your timeline was so tight. But then also it sounds like grassroots was so impactful. So how did you kind of navigate that of like, with little time, did you turn away from opportunities that seemed like they wouldn't yield enough results? Like, I guess I'm such a champion of the grassroots fundraising and would love to know how that played out in your tight timeline situation.
No, we did it all. We had no time to
A
turn
lot of
anything
circles.
down. Yeah, and the way, I mean, we bifurcated it, right? So actually Dani and some other folks were part of a committee, right? A subgroup that focused on gifts that were under, I think we had under 25,000 or 50,000. The bar was pretty high. Normally you wouldn't call that a grassroots gift, but in our case, because we had such a short time, as you said, but also such a high bar we had to meet so quickly. We didn't, you know, to not overwhelm or dilute any individual's efforts. Like for me, I had to hold myself back from doing kind of the grassroots fundraising, which is a lot of what I've done, you know, as part of my career, and really focus on the more, you know, the larger gifts to people who happen to have greater resources. And that's the other point I want to make, is that one of the beauties of this campaign, and this is true for folks who gave some of the higher amount, was that the tenor we wanted to set, and we still, you know, work hard for this, and a lot of the donors feel this too, is that no individual gift is more worthy than somebody else's. And we know this, right? We all contribute what we can. And whether it was, you know, $1, and we had lots of folks, you know, putting money in at farmers markets, we can never really thank them except with a shout out like here, right? Or, you know, and then, you know, we had folks who went all the way up to 5 million. And, you know, the county and the state are involved too, right? We're waiting for their big gifts to still, their contributions to come in. But none was more worthy than the other. And I think, you know, kind of that as our sensibility and our approach to it, as well as bifurcating the work and having different groups focus on different levels, made it just possible. Because we were tired, right? It was kind of exhausting. It was exhilarating. But there's no way, personally for me, I could have done both. And so I needed Dani, right? And the crew that was focusing on the grassroots and leading Instagram and some of these mini campaigns. Like, we've got a little match, you know, of blah, 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 you know, show your friends you can contribute, you know, that all builds the momentum together.
Very cool. Thank you.
Thank you. I see 2 questions in the chat. So Dani, can you talk about why it was inappropriate to build housing on the land, like the real core of why this work was really important?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, it had a personal place in my heart. So that was the passion piece. That land was so important to me from the moment I moved to Santa Barbara. So obviously I had a personal reason, but then as you start to really educate yourself on the land, there was a lot of ecological significance there that so many people didn't really know. I mean, that's where some of the last of our native grasses were. There's a lot of restoration happening to bring those back. It's a connecting corridor for lots of really important birds that we have. And there's cultural significance. And so it's important that we understand it's also a buffer for our community, a fire buffer. So that piece of land is really important to protect those houses down below. Yeah, so those are some of the reasons. And we're losing a lot of our open space. I mean, that was just something, I mean, listening, it's important to listen to the community and what is needed. And this just wasn't, also not the best place for houses. I mean, if you really think about it. So I'd say some of those are some of the elements that really drove us to really push this forward.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Katie wants to know, did you have time to do a feasibility study before launching the campaign?
No, but it's a great question, Katie.
Yeah.
I've been musing on it while I was listening to Dani, multitasking as we do. There was a small period, when I reflect back, where Channel Islands Restoration, I think it was Elihu Gevertz and others, floated the idea of trying to raise money for the last 101 acres. And it was a time where they had reached out to the developer and landowner and were hoping to have a conversation. that was a period where those conversations weren't happening.
Mhm.
Behind the scenes, what folks probably don't know, and I was part of some of these conversations, is that created some chatter amongst open space advocates and donors, people who do watch for these campaigns. They're watching for what might pop on the Gaviota Coast, right? A lot of us wondering what's going to happen there. Mora Mesa, another property. These are folks who have been involved with Elwood, with Douglas Family Preserve, formerly known as the Wilcox, Cart Bluffs, right? So some of those folks, we're all talking to each other, right? Off and on. Again, people weren't necessarily seeing each other much. But I do remember during that phase, actually taking a day trip for my anniversary with my partner to Anacapa and running into a couple of folks who happened to be contributors to those sorts of campaigns, and them saying, what do you know about this? So I think in a way, I hadn't really thought about it as feasibility, but there was a little bit of chatter. And I think that helped a bit. And that actually, we were able to recruit some of those folks in who had brought it up. Said, would you come help with this effort once it popped and we actually had an option to purchase? Before that, it just was hopeful. But no, in terms of a typical campaign, no time. Normally you would take at least 2 years for something like this, right? At least 2 years.
Yeah.
Literally when I could tell the purchase option purchase agreement looked like it might go, and what I heard was 90 days. I said, so would it be helpful if I hop in and help maybe put some structure together for the fundraising part? And we just started laughing. It was like, yeah, like now. And basically like started like that minute before it was even public that we had it. And so, yeah, not really feasibility in that regard. It was like, go for it. Like,
yeah,
here we go, into the pool.
Setting out to raise $20 million without a feasibility study is a terrible idea, but it worked.
Crazy.
Good job. And so I know that you had an agreement, right, with the donors. Can you guys shed some light on that?
What do you mean?
Which part?
Oh,
many agreements about if we weren't successful.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was pivotal. Yeah. So, we just put out very quickly. I mean, this is part of the work that we were able to do behind the scenes with Santa Barbara Foundation and with Channel Islands Restoration, was not only that we wanted to be able to say if we're not successful, we could return the money, but also that we could take pledges and not push go on those until we were close, right, to certain benchmarks. And the tricky part of that behind the scenes is that that's very easy. Well, not very, it's easier to do with larger sums of money, right? Because there's fewer, and because you can kind of track it, and there's costs. The things with campaigns is there's costs associated with these things. And most of us were volunteers, but we had to have some paid structure. And, Santa Barbara Foundation needs to cover its core costs, for instance, things like that. So we actually had to get kind of creative and bifurcate how we took contributions in because of that promise. So anything above $250, would go to Santa Barbara Foundation and Channel Islands Restoration via PayPal. We had to like hunt around, and Ken and Maury were great about this. They're like, what's the best mechanism for being able to kind of hold the money and return it without any fees? And PayPal, it's still up on the website. And that was great because Santa Barbara Foundation, they were saying, we hate to say this, but we still need to charge a fee. And so for $250, we don't feel like we could make good easily on that promise. We want to, and we appreciate it. And so we had to get creative. So that was that stuff behind the scenes where we just scratch our heads and then we do a bunch of research. And then we just go, okay, we're going to do it like this. Mm-hmm. And Mary Rose, who was our campaign, is still, with us, campaign director and a campaign manager. And again, she does this for political campaigns. So she was super helpful in that way because it was very akin. She had a reporter once say, what's the scariest moment for you with this campaign? And she didn't answer publicly, but really it was having to give the money back. For her, for the behind the scenes team lead, right? It's like, oh my God, to have to return the money. Like that would be months in the making. You'd want to get it right. You'd have to double, triple check everything. It's like, no, please, give the money back.
It wasn't an option.
Yeah.
In my mind, I was like, not an option.
No, we must succeed.
Yeah.
So Stanley, I'm gonna ask you to join us. You had a handful of questions, so thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for hosting this. This is a really fascinating window into an incredible campaign. I put here in the chat, I was really encouraged to hear, and I'm not surprised at all, to hear you, Nancy, talk about really staying firm in this kind of this set of values around honoring the inherent value of any donation, right? And I think one thing that struck me was, right, you had these $5 million contributions or a $10,000 text pledge, but you also had like the bake sale, you had the activists like camping out on the land. You don't see that very often, right? And I certainly I haven't. And I guess one, I'm just like, that is just so impressive. But two, how do you, I don't know if there's any more detail on like, what does that look like on a day-to-day? Like, how do you honor those $5 donations and the $5,000, $50,000, et cetera, dollar donations? It almost, to me, I would guess it's almost like a discipline in the way that you were talking about messaging and all of that, but also maybe a discipline in like the way you interact with donors. So that's just one set of thoughts that I was they were clunking around my brain right now.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but the only way I've been able to fundraise is recall that it's not for me, right? And that's a big hurdle, especially for a lot of board members who don't want to do it. You know, they're scared to do it, for instance, when working in nonprofit. But also that, leading with respect and love and acknowledging that, everybody's resources are precious to them, right? And it's their choice if they want to give. So that's kind of how I do it. But I got to say, my kind of North Star on how to relay the deep connection to the land and the communication around that really fell for me to two or three folks. One was Ernestine De Soto, and the Shumash elder who's been kind of the spiritual guide for the campaign, and Mariam Barra, whose family descends from the closest village site. Her grandmother 6 times back lived there. And Dani, to you, Dani, and the messaging that was already in place via social media, and also just Dani, how you communicate, it has just taught me so much about how to actualize that sensibility, which I share, but I don't always have the right words, right? So Dani, you were so helpful. And just a shout out to Dani now too, that on the land, if folks haven't been there for a little bit, we've placed some boulders that we got for free from the debris flow, actually, because they're going to be our gratitude boulders. We wanted to put something natural on the land to thank everybody, but we wanted it to fit into the natural landscape. And now we have the tough chore, frankly, of what do you put on those plaques? We have 5,500 donors. How do you first begin to convey the sheer gratitude and like amazement of that, right? But not only that, we can't fit everybody's names. That's just, we'd have to have tons of boulders. So how do we do that? And Dani, I'd like to hear how you navigate that. But I just wanted one more shout out to you. The illustration for me of how Dani guides me. She said, when we were on the land looking at these boulders and talking together, what are we going to put on them? She said, my deepest, desire is to have a way to convey that, to the community, not only our gratitude for the donations, but to everybody, that this is possible, that anybody can do this, banded together. We can achieve change. We can achieve great things. So Dani, that's enough for me. What helps you tap into that deep space to guide us in that regard?
Honestly, it's that piece that I was mentioning in the beginning. You have to know your why. And it changes almost every week. I mean, this was the most intense thing I've ever experienced in my life, because not only was it 90 days, we had to raise that 20 million. It was like we had every week we had to send him a certain amount, or the deal was done. So it wasn't even that we had 90 days. We had 3. It was like I can't even remember. I mean, I think I've compartmentalized some of it, but it was every day connecting with the land and making sure that I'm coming from a pure place of what is the best thing for this land? What is the best thing for the community? And asking yourself that before you go into anything, even before I'd have conversations with major donors. Like we had one amazing, who's now a close sister of mine, her father, he loaned a good amount of money. It was just amazing. He's with Alimov Foundation. And it was like, before I went into the conversation with him, he's like, all right, you have 2 minutes, sell me on this land. And that was him, that's his personality. And I was like, okay, here we go. And, it's like, you have to take that moment to know why you're doing this and really check in with yourself every single day before you even ask anyone, to be involved. And, so yeah, that's the only piece that I feel like is important. Just every day checking in with yourself. Like, why am I doing this? Why am I here? Is this for the greatest good? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So Lauren, you put a question in the chat about sort of expanding on what we were just talking about. How do you, with 5,500 donors, how do you say thank you? That's a lot of thank you notes. So can you go ahead, Lauren? I'll turn it over to you to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all this. I'm so intrigued by everything. And I know there was like a massive time crunch for everything. And I'm just curious if there was like a process during the time crunch where you had like a plan in place for thanking donors, making sure they felt the love. I'm just so intrigued by how that kind of played out during the time crunch piece of it.
Yeah, so I think, again, multiple levels. Dani via social media, Dani and Sam really handled that kind of quick community outpouring and keeping folks updated. I think all the donors understood there wasn't a lot of time, so the pressure was off in that regard. Because normally, I don't know about you all as fundraisers, but my practice is I try to get something in the mail or some acknowledgement within, preferably a week, couple weeks. 3 weeks is the outlier for me. If it gets longer than that, then I start wiggling in my chair and I'm not comfortable with it. I think it's how I was raised or something. It's very old school, but sincere. So I think that for me, seeing what Dani and others were putting out really helped, and making sure donors were tapped into that. We had some little bit of email stuff going out, but we really didn't have the list together, and it was moving so fast. Santa Barbara Foundation had in place their usual acknowledgement process, so they handled that big stuff. And part of the reason they were so pivotal, and those of us who've done capital or endowment campaigns or major give campaigns, we knew we needed an entity that could manage like the stock transactions and other types of higher level gifts that could come in. And we could have set that up, right? But we didn't have time to set it up, and that's not we're not pros at it. And but somebody like Andrea Light and Jessica Sanchez, huge shout out to that team at Santa Barbara Foundation, handled that. So we knew that that their thank yous would come, and that they'd be gracious on the phone and all of that. But the other shout I want to say is after we hit the marker and we actually closed escrow, we did throw a party, and Peter Schuyler and Lisa Stratton lent their garden a number of times, as we all figured out that maybe we could be outside, maybe masked and stuff. We started to have some little groupings to build momentum, particularly for major gifts. And then we threw a party at the end, so that felt good. And then again, Peter, who's really a professional fundraising volunteer, right? Just because he cares, he and Mary Rose just masterminded the big list. Any name that we could find ended up in not a database. Santa Barbara Foundation has a semblance of one, but we ended up dumping them all into a huge Excel spreadsheet. It's crazy, right? It's not what you normally want to do, but it was the most efficient way, in a way that Peter could control that list, check for duplicates and all that. And we had this massive, massive, you know, kind of serial parties or get-togethers where we did go through, you know, the list and send either postcards or cards to everybody. And we also came up with these stickers ideas. I don't know who came up with it. Dani, was that you? Peter would, he put the list together, and he would share facts. Like, we had one household, people who happen to live together in kind of a shared housing situation, not all of the same family, who gave 16 times within that 3 months, and the gifts totaled less than $1,000. So they dipped in over and over and over again. And so somebody came up with the idea of having a sticker that got slapped on the cards that said, "Thank you for your multiple gifts," like a way to acknowledge. So we just, again, the creativity of the team coming from that place of, we want to acknowledge, this is so hard to know how to do it. And that massive mailing party, and we got all of those out. So that's kind of, and then Dani, actually, for businesses, you created, tell them about the kind of weekend of appreciation. That was brilliant.
Yeah, so we also were really keeping in touch through email as well. We were thanking so many people through emails, and then we had what we called a kickoff party, and I think we did this twice, where it was basically just a big celebration for anyone who participated, no matter what that looked like, whether they, you know, gave their time or they gave money, and it supported all the businesses that also participated in the campaign. And so we had this amazing 3-day like kickoff where you could go to Santa Barbara Kayak or Santa Barbara Adventure and like Rincon Brewery, and you get discounts at all of these places. So it was a really fun way to thank everyone, at least in the community, that lived here. Yeah, it was just all about getting creative, and I loved our handwritten notes. That was really fun to do as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, my friend Stanley has another question.
Hello. I can't help but wonder if you all have a sense of if there's more momentum building for sort of campaigns, not quite like this necessarily, but campaigns to make land kind of more accessible for the public good after this, or was it kind of like this incredible sprint, a huge exhale? I just wonder if there's been kind of any ongoing conversations around that, whether it's for housing or open space or access to the outdoors, whatever it is.
Yeah, no, you know, and I still say this because, by the way, you know, we're in the final push to close the gap for the endowment. We want $1 million endowment at minimum to run with the land, and so it's called the restoration endowment. So we still have 700,000 we're trying to raise. We're not going to go back public, you know, to the grassroots communities because everybody gave so much. We called that off, right? Like, thank you, but please, you know, take care of yourselves, right? And yeah, maybe wait for the next thing. But you know, the highest aspiration that I think we all had was to do, even though it was breakneck pace, and I'm sure we made some mistakes along the path, how can you not? But that to end the campaign, you know, conclude the campaign with everybody feeling like, wow, look at what's possible. Like Dani said, that sensibility, like any of us can make change, can make big things happen when we work together, and with, you know, with purpose, and you know, from shared values and all that. But also that the campaign's kind of ethics and that we would have done a really good job with it. And that's personally super important to me, to just hold ourselves to a very high standard, and make sure that it's as feel good at the end, not just for the campaign and for me personally, but for everything else. All the other dollars, all of you try to raise all of the time, right? All the smaller efforts, and then maybe for the next big one. And yeah, we had so many folks, it was a first time donation for them, right? And we hope that we've built the capacity, kind of shown that folks can contribute and make big things happen, like I said, so that you know, when cause does something, that somehow that reverberates out a little bit, let alone maybe a more kindred campaign for open space. And you know, that's my highest, you know, hope, that people saw what's possible, and that we energize more people into philanthropy, right? That's really, you know, the big term. We'll see.
All right, thank you. What other questions or shared successes does the group have? And it's possible that we have come to the end. Thank you guys so much. Of course, for joining us and sharing your experience and your expertise, but thank you for what you have done for our community. Like it's breathtaking, and I am really grateful to each of you. So,
well, I'm sure there's other donors to the campaign in our little audience here today, so I want to call that out. Taryn said she gave multiple times, and couldn't have done it without you. This was truly, you know, the big team, right? Capital T, capital C community. So that's what takes my breath away, right? Like just people pouring in. Just felt like a lot of love and a lot of belief, right? In a time where it's kind of hard to hold the faith about a lot of things. So maybe that, Stanley, is ultimately the biggest takeaway, right? That Dani speaks to and keeps guiding me on, is we can all be part of the change we want to see, right? You know, kind of butchering Gandhi's quote here, but you know, that's what we're trying. I think all of us on this call are trying to do. Like, we just want, you know, we want to live in a community where we're taking care of each other, we're taking care of nature, we're combating some of the big challenges of our time, yeah, like I said, maybe have a little fun along the way. I think that's part of taking care of myself anyway, is some good laughter.
We had a lot of fun.
love it. Love it. Well, thank you both so much for your time today and your expertise. And I appreciate all of you, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, and I want to thank everybody too, and just say, come walk on the land. And if you have more kind of, especially mechanics or, you know, questions that didn't get answered today, or you know, want to talk one-on-one, I'm personally available to, you know, talk about it and just share what kind of worked and what didn't work. And yeah, so just an open invitation.
Thank you. Thank you. We can include some information about the ongoing endowment campaign. We can include some information about the land in our follow-up email. So thank you guys just so much, all of you, for being here. Thank you, Nancy. All right. Thanks, Dani. See ya.
Bye.
Take care.
You too.